Welcome to episode 36 of the Ape and Bird NFT show. We are rebranding temporarily today as I twist my words. We are back to the Bourbon Bird show with Matt Willemsen from Collective Shift. Really excited to have Matt on the show today. Matt is deep into crypto and NFTs, works full-time in the space, is a little bit of a degen. So we're looking forward to chatting to Matt today. Matt, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
Howdy, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here on I'm another burb. I'm basically tagging in for Secure. So keeping that Bourbon Bird show. And yeah, I do apologize for not wearing black today for the NFT funeral. I got my navy on, but I should have brought my black shades and my black jumper, as we are really call it a day on NFTs. But we got some hope actually to preview a bit of what we're going to be talking about.
we do.
One thing.
You've come in nice and hot with our NFT funeral, which we're definitely going to get to. I think floors continue to bleed. It's pretty bleak out there for the NFT land. So we did joke around this week on Twitter saying that we are going to be talking about the NFT funeral today. But before we get to the doomy and gloomy part, we do want to start with some good news. But just very quickly, Matt, give us just a quick snapshot of your involvement in the crypto space and in particular your sort of interest in NFTs.
Yeah, sure. I've been in the crypto space professionally my whole career now. So it's been 5.5 years now since I've been full time in crypto. Vast majority of that has been in a research capacity. So basically just keeping track what's going on in the crypto market, covering all the DeFi trend when that was coming and going, and some other trends, and then most recently NFTs, and really just explaining that for Collective Shift members, breaking down, what is the value proposition of this new technology or new trend or application of blockchain? Why should you care about it? What risks are there, et cetera, highlighting some main projects. So that's really what I've been doing, for 5.5 years now, and enjoying it more than ever, even in these quieter conditions. Definitely gives me a bit more time to get on the research side of things. In terms of NFTs, as I said, probably 18 months ago or so, really started, covering that more extensively, and diving into it, and, profile pictures and obviously all the other types of NFTs that you cover here on the Ape and Bird show. That has really been, a big focus for me in the last 18 months, for Collective Shift, as well as some other sort of, all the layer 2 side of things I spend a bit of time on as well. But yeah, I think in terms of individually, what sort of got me really excited about NFTs, for me, it was, to be honest, the diversity of backgrounds that it brought into crypto. If I'm being honest, I was probably 4 years into crypto at that stage, and predominantly I'd been dealing with people with a background in finance, people with a background in tech. And yeah, it's all really interesting, but to that stage, crypto didn't really have that many use cases. And then all of a sudden you saw this wave of, creatives, gamers even have applications in NFTs. And I was just sort of blown away. Plug in the NFT Fest Australia, going back to that first one that was digitally or virtually, back in the day in COVID. And even then, just getting that sort of that glance over all the different use cases and where people have come from. That's individually, personally, what got me really excited down the NFT rabbit hole. And then here we are in May 2023, about to get into things, how we've been going lately.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I remember a line that I gave in a keynote at Oz Crypto Convention last year that I think, sort of rings true, where, I got into NFTs, 2 years ago, a little bit over 2 years ago. I wasn't really in the heart of crypto. So I was one of those new people that were coming in that you talked about, Matt. And I think sort of use the analogy of if hip hop brought culture to disco, then NFTs brought culture to crypto. And I think we saw, that wave of gaming artists, obviously the PFP projects, sports with NBA Top Shot sort of popping off.
Yeah.
And we're still early days, as we say at nauseum, but it's very, very different times right now from 2 years ago. I think I saw a tweet the other day. It was Meebit's birthday last week, and then we are obviously celebrated 2 years of Bored Apes recently, and then V Friends I think minted on the day today 2 years ago. So it's crazy sort of times to think about how far we went up and then how far we've went back down. And you as a Moonbird holder would know that also well as I do, round tripping what could have been an extraordinary exit all the way back down. So congratulations for that, Matt, and we can share the pain.
100%. Know it all too well. And yeah, just even yesterday, Zenica, I think, shared one of his screenshots from his tables that he used to share on NFT prices. And that was from maybe 2 years ago. And yeah, my mind was blown about how far we've come, which including all the bumps and all the highs
Yep.
as well.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Let's start with some good news. So an artist,
Wait,
ACK
what?
Alpha.
Good news. What?
Good news. We're going to start with good news. An artist, ACK Alpha Centuria Kid, I hope I pronounced that right, launched a collection called Broken Keys. It was sort of based around like pianos, and there was, I think there was 48 of them, Matt, and they sold out for a total of 756 ETH, or roughly 1.5 million in total sales. I mean, that's an incredible feat for this market that we're currently in. I mean, did you see some of the pieces yourself, and what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I did. I think they had a really cool virtual gallery on Cyber, one of your favorites, Greg. I know you like. That they had basically a gallery and a really like immersive experience. And I do remember seeing on that website it had like a hidden key as well, where you could type in A space C space K, and it would bring up like a hidden collection, which I think fetched and actually on the auction in terms of all of those 48, it actually was just somewhere in the middle, like surprisingly. But I really liked how much thought went into like all of these pieces, having that piano in every single piece, but some of them had to really look for in terms of where was the piano. And yeah, I think similar to what we saw with, Jack Butcher, I suppose back in January. I don't know, Alpha Centauri Kid really like publicly was like sharing the progress of this collection. And then yeah, you saw the big bids from some of the common names that are left in the space. The likes of Curated and whatnot snapped
Yes.
up a few, and some of the even artists were also some of the purchasers, which was again really healthy seeing that, and almost was a testament, or almost highlighted how much this collection was sort of a lot of fandom and encouragement of ACK over this collection. So great to see. Great to see. I haven't seen anything like this in quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, amazing effort. I think it's a testament to sort of going back to the artistic roots of the NFT space that sort of really helped launch this thing. Obviously, Beeple's sale in March 2021 of the 69 million thing just propelled sort of NFTs into the mind share of the average person. And I think people are fatigued from the PFP run. There's obviously a few exceptions there. Azuki's holding up reasonably well, although they've had a lot of a lot of their collection dumped into blur bids in the last sort of 24 to 48 hours. I've seen some Pudgy Penguins sort of do pretty well. We're going to get to them in a second. And then obviously collections like Milady and the
Mm.
Captains that are sort of holding on, but everything else is just really down. And I think there's a fatigue there. I think that the blur sort of factor plays a role in that as well, which we're going to touch on in a minute. But I think going back to some of these artists, and I want to give Giant Swan, a Melbourne-based VR NFT artist. Many of the listeners may be familiar with Giant Swan. I actually purchased my first Giant Swan piece earlier today. It was a collection of 180, I think, and it was very reasonably priced at 0.069 ETH, so about 120, 130 USD dollars. And I think just doing these sort of like drops, like I didn't buy the Giant Swan collection or the piece from the collection from anything. I just wanted something by Giant Swan in my wallet, and I thought the price was pretty reasonable. And I think as the amount of people that are actually purchasing NFTs continues to get smaller and smaller at this junction, at this point in time, art is still something that can do well in this market, but it's certainly the exception and not the norm. So shout out to ACK for a brilliant sale, and to all of those 48 collectors. I think you are right, Matt. Curated were one of the buyers. I think they actually purchased the highest valued NFT from the 48 at 30 ETH. So shout out to ACK. But moving on, I do want to talk just in general, Matt. We have seen from around January where, late January, I think floors were holding up reasonably well in January. We had a little bit of a blur stimulus check with around Valentine's Day, mid-February, when Blur, allowed for their first airdrop claim with their token. We saw floors run up, not on every collection, but, maybe about 80% of collections. And that lasted about a week. And for the last essentially 3 months, we have been down only pretty much on 95 to 97% of collections. Is this the worst you've seen the NFT market in your time since you've been paying attention?
Yes. Yeah. I think it is. I think it is more so just because of how far down it has come. So like, yeah, we've seen, generally interest be pretty low at periods and whatnot. But I think there's always been like light at the end of the tunnel and like a way out. Whereas crypto might have been performing well and we might have been in the NFT market, okay, well, those profits will eventually be coming into NFTs. But at the moment, with the performance of crypto and even the macro sort of economy being, pretty down only as well, it's, sort of, really for me, I can't really see too much of a way out in the short term. I think there will eventually things will change. But then when I think in terms of like factors that really, drove that, I think Blur was one that sort of maybe a lot of people are pointing at and almost like accusing it of being the instigator of the bear market. But I sort of, or at least deepening the bear market. I kind of would disagree with that. I think you've had other things like gas fees as well. So it's like who's going to be the bit who's like willing to like pay high gas fees to like buy a collection. So therefore, it doesn't really give retail or just everyday collectors that much incentive to go ahead and buy and flip NFTs. Which, as much flack as the flippers sort of cop, they are sort of essential in a way to sort of bolster some activity in the market. And then just generally, I think like we actually talked about this a lot in our interview on Collective Shift last year. I think the roadmap of all of these projects is, I think the execution risk that we talked a lot about last year, in terms of, okay, similar to ICOs, how you've got that sort of announcement at the start, the roadmap, you're buying into a lot of future sort of, promises. And now here we are 12, 18 months later where, where we're seeing if those promises are delivered, if that execution has taken place at the standard where they promised it, or at least like said confidently that they could do. And here we are seeing that, in a lot of cases, nothing really that spectacular has come out on the technological side of things. And that's where you see things like art, Greg, really holding up, probably in relative terms. Like it has been down like very heavily, but I would still mount a more of a bullish case for art NFTs, given how, pretty woeful the execution has been, for a lot of these inexperienced teams at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very, very fair take. On Blur, I mean, everyone definitely has differing opinions, and I agree with you that I think there are a lot of other headwinds outside of just, blaming Blur. I think Blur can be somewhat of a scapegoat for everything happening at the moment. Having said that, I do believe that Blur plays a factor just because of the incentivized sort of bidding, and I think NFT statistics on the Proof Daily podcast, who does a really great job, Sam. He's mentioned this for a couple of months now, really, that it's not really a sort of an efficient market, or it's not really a sort of fair market where you've got big whales that are getting paid to sort of put these bids on, and you're essentially you're essentially got a lot of people that are holding NFTs that don't want them, right? And did that happen previously? Was someone just jumping into a project because they wanted to flip it, and when Blur didn't even exist? Of course that was happening, but it wasn't happening sort of at the scale that we see now. And obviously people are buying, whales are buying massive amounts of
Mm,
collections and then dumping, multiple hundreds sometimes of collections. And, floors are struggling because it's just a grind down lower and lower. And I think that for the average person that wants to get involved in NFTs, and, I've mentioned this on this show before, is, the momentum of wanting to see price go up. Like, you don't want to be catching this falling knife. So if you're wanting to get into Doodles or Clone X or any of these collections, and for a couple of months all you've seen is just them constantly grinding lower, like even if when they have a small spike
yeah,
up, that will be taken away in the matter of a couple of days. And we've seen that with Clone X, we've seen that Moonbirds, we've seen that with Doodles, we've seen that MFers, we've seen it with like pretty much Meebits, nearly every collection. And I think, I think it's just one of those things that are keeping people on the sideline a little bit longer, because they're looking at it and they're like, I wouldn't mind getting in this project, but when's it going to bottom? Because I don't want to be paying 2 ETH for something if it's going to 1 ETH, right? Whereas previously, I think there was you could get a spike in floors and then momentum was going upwards and people would
yes,
FOMO back in. And we're just not
yes,
seeing that in a Blur era, in my opinion. So, I think Blur's built a pretty good tool. Like I use it quite often, particularly now they've got like the green and red on the sales component, where you go to a collection and you actually see like out of the last 50 sales, which ones have been dumped into Blur bids and which ones has actually been a buyer either on Blur or OpenSea or X2Y2, etc. And they're
mm,
sort of held in green. So that can sometimes give you a bit of a temperature check of like, are they actually buyers or are they like holders that are just trying to get out of the project? But then we're obviously seeing these big dumps as well. And as I mentioned off the top, Azuki's had a couple of big dumps in the last few days that have sort of taken them in that 15 and a half range right down to about 13 and a half. So yeah, it's interesting, Matt, when I think about the timeline of NFTs, and I've been writing, a bit for Cointelegraph this year, and it's been a really fun exercise because I've been going
mm,
down the rabbit hole of just sort of some of the OGs in the NFT space, particularly around the art. The likes of Josie Bellini. I've actually got another one coming out with Trevor Jones next
nice.
week, and NFTs still relatively haven't been around for very long. When we think about, yes, there were projects, sort of, experimentation projects on Ethereum in 2015, like Etheria, and 2016 Pixel Map and a few others. But it was really like sort of the Crypto Punks and Crypto Kitties that were sort of the two most prominent collections. And they had a little moment in the sun, particularly Crypto Kitties in 2017. And then Autoglyph sort of, 2019. And then, Crypto Arte was in 2018. It's a project that I personally love, know the founder. But ultimately, these were just all experiments. And, you really had to be very, very deep in NFTs at the time and like a bit of a nerd to really know what was happening. And people were just buying for the sake of buying, but everything was like really reasonably priced, right? Like you could pick up, people were paying like $50 for Crypto Punks, and they were paying, these really small amounts. Like even Trevor Jones, the artist, was telling me that his sale in 2020, he did a collaboration with A Lot of Money, who's another OG NFT artist who unfortunately passed away in the last year or so. And previously to Trevor's 5-figure sale, so he sold an NFT for about $10,000, right? When ETH was still at only 300 or 400 US dollars in 2020, before the real big run up. And he was saying that $10,000 NFT sale, and this is 2020, so we're only talking about, a couple of years ago still, that was the largest NFT sale, like art sale, and it broke records. And the previous biggest one was like Matt Cain at maybe like 1,000 or $1,500.
In
Now,
2020.
in 2020,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
it sounds crazy too, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah.
So actually, I could be mixing that up. I think it was actually 2019. So apologies to our
But
listeners
even
there.
even then, like even then,
Yeah, it is in my
yeah,
article. So I've
yeah.
fact checked all this. But yeah, ultimately, what I'm trying to say is the prices we've seen for NFTs, like where I sort of worry or sort of go like, how do we bottom out here? Is I think
Mm,
about there are projects like autoglyphs and, punks and chromie squiggles. Like, they're definitely not going to zero, right?
Yeah.
They're holding up, relatively speaking. They're still been hurt. I mean, we don't see a lot of liquidity in autoglyphs when there's
Mm,
only 500 of them and they're so expensive. But ultimately, it's sort of like, I look at the market and I go, there's not really precedent as there is with, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin, where you can sort of look at it and you can say, okay, we've seen this movie before. Bitcoin dropped down to here, and this is obviously your bread and butter, Matt, at Collective Shift, where you're giving insights and sort of jumping into the research, etc. But when I think about NFTs,
mm,
when they caught fire, sort of, end of 2020, start of 2021, with that Top Shot wave, then we started to see these massive art sales like the Trevor Joneses of the world on Nifty Gateway. So art had its moment. And then it was sort of like with the apes, like CryptoPunks were starting to pump, and then the apes came along. And then you had things like, maybe it's not that they pumped very much, but then you had, the Cool Cats, a World of Women, you had all of these projects that just shot out of the gates, right?
mm,
And were essentially had the lion's share of attention for the last 2 years. And now we're looking at Cool Cats at like 0.6 and World of Women at 0.8. And like some of the more recent ones like Moonbirds that have obviously just been absolutely hammered. And a lot of it's to do with, their own fault, to be perfectly honest. But we've seen all these projects, just get hammered. And I
mm,
look at it and I go, it's not like saying, oh, well, we know that something like Cool Cats is going to come back and bounce back because, we've had a bear market before. And what we see is, like, we haven't had a bear market in
true.
NFTs before. I would actually argue the bear market was sort of like, it started as a bear market. Like, it started as this, in 2017, it was just this, like, people toying around with it. I'm actually not sure with CryptoKitties whether they ran up. I have a feeling maybe they got a little valuable at one point. I should go back and check that in sort of that 2018 era. But then, you had a pretty hard bear market in crypto in general in 2018,
Mm.
2019, and early 2020, which I'm sure you're well aware of, Matt. And then NFTs have come along and had this massive moment in the sun. At least the collections we've all become accustomed to. So I'm sort of sitting here sometimes scratching my head going, are we actually coming back at all with some of these collections? Or when the next sort of quote unquote bull market comes, is just going to be completely different collections, outside of maybe a handful of, the crypto punks, the apes will still be around, maybe the Pudgy Penguins of the world. But like, I don't know. I do ask this question myself.
I've never, that was a great way to put it. I've never actually thought of it like that. I've always thought of these mini bear markets, but we're really like, when you step back, they really aren't. Like, they're really, like, they've only been like 2 or 3 months in, like 2021 and stuff, where things just went down, but it was just a retracement in a broader
Yep.
uptrend. But that's a great point. It's probably what people, well, some of the really early stage, like crypto, people in like 2011, 2012 might have been thinking those existential questions. Obviously, it's a lot different now because these all are digital assets that have got a lot more attention now. But, they might have been thinking, oh, is this over? Like, and then it
Yeah.
comes back to, okay, like, do these things even, is there even value in them? Do people, will there always be people, at least this baseline of interest? And then, yeah, you touch on that point of these older ones being displaced by newer ones potentially, like the likes of Cool Cats. Like, it may just never come back, and there might be new ones that come in, similar to what you saw. So when you get waves of innovation in just blockchain, where you've got all these Bitcoin like forks that happened in like 2010 to 2013. If you go back on Coin Market Cap and go on the historical charts, like, you'll see the top 20, and you will only recognize like, 1 to 4 sort of names. Like, there's XRP, Dogecoin, Bitcoin, Litecoin. All the others are basically dead. Even though directionally the whole market picked up again several times. So it is a good question to ask, and it makes you wonder if there are going to be these new sorts of NFTs that drive adoption, which may very well be non-PFP sort of NFTs, like the likes of Starbucks and, all the ticketing ones and whatnot, which continues to sort of get this adoption and use, I've noticed, in the past like 6 months or so, regardless of the bear market. So, whilst those might, instigate a lot of adoption, those price cycles may not even be a thing. We may just think they're a thing because of cryptocurrency. So, yeah, I've never thought
Yeah.
of it like that. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember in 2021 when Mutant Apes launched, or round about the time just after Mutant Apes launched, and sort of heading into October. And I remember I went quite heavy, which I think I've said on the show before, in Tom Bilyeu's Impact Theory Founders Key, which I mean, I've watched Tom's stuff for quite some time, and I sort of went, oh man, I wish I aped harder into VFriends. And I was sort of like, I was almost like chasing my FOMO from VFriends into Tom Bilyeu's. But the reason I bring that up is, I remember there was sort of a quote unquote NFT bear market, but it wasn't really a bear market. It was just a temporary dip in what was still an insane bull run, right? Like over and it probably went for 4 to 6 weeks. And I remember Mutant Apes was sitting around like, I think they minted between 2.5 and 3. They're sitting around a floor of about 3.5 and 4 for quite some time.
Yes,
And
I
then they
remember.
just
Yeah.
exploded, right? Like they ran up to like 20 in no time. But when I look back at that moment in time, that was not a bear market, right? Like this
Mm,
is a bear market. Like
yes.
this is much different mentally, like compared to what was there in sort of that little hiccup in September, October 2021. So yeah, I am
Mm,
going to be interested. Like, don't get me wrong, I think that there'll definitely be a speculative market and a collector's market for NFTs as we currently know them. But I think the thing
mm,
that I'm trying to remind myself or question myself, and I think I saw a tweet the other day, it's like the thing that got you here is not going to get you there, or something along the
yeah.
lines. But I interpreted that as sort of keep your eyes wide open, right? Where don't necessarily just be thinking that the NFTs that we've been looking at nauseum on Blur and OpenSea over the last 12 to 24 months are going to be the ones that are coming out of the next cycle. There will be some, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do see many of these just sort of fade into the night, which I think we're pretty much the writings on the wall now. Like
Yeah.
it's incredible when I went on Cool, like I still own a Cool Cat.
Yeah.
Want to talk about another round trip that I've made. I am the world's best round tripper. I want a POAP for that. So, but looking at that at point 0.5, point 0.6, and I'm like, man, that thing was at like I think a 16, 17
Yes.
floor at one
Yeah.
point.
It did.
And it's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard to sell tops. We know that, but like
Yeah.
riding it all the way back down, and it's just there's just no catalyst for bumps in projects at the moment.
Nah, nah. But yeah, partially because of what you said, that Sam's been saying a lot because of that reason of Blur. But then also, yeah, again, like they've already launched so many like secondary projects, like what collections, like they've shown that they've, been poor execution, sort of a team that poorly executes. Like again, what's that reason to buy in? It's very, very hard to find them. So that's a great point. Keep your eyes wide open. Look at Blur and OpenSea, but also have the back of your head this may not always be the case.
Yeah, 100%. So, Pudgy Penguins, wanted to give them a quick shout out. They bucked the trend. They actually had a little bit of a spike in their floor price. I think they're sitting around like low to mid fours at the moment. They actually raised a $9 million seed round, which they announced yesterday, I believe it was, Matt. We've seen projects before, including Moonbirds that you and I are both involved with. Um, raise a bunch of money from VCs. I think Moonbirds did 50 million with, led by A16Z. We saw VFriends very similar. We've seen Yuga Labs get a raise as well back in the day. These were catalysts actually that bumped
Mm,
floors up incredibly high, during that bull market. This has given Pudgies a little bit of a shot in the arm. Not that they're what I would say struggling compared to other projects, but is this actually a good thing, Matt? Like Pudgies to me had sort of this, they've had a wild ride because, the NFT project got bought by Luca Netz, who has, a background in sort of, e-commerce and like just building brands in general, internet brands. Do you think that this is well received by the Pudgy community, or do you think it's going to have a bit of backlash given that some of the other VC funding has probably led to some conversations by holders like, what is your priority? Is it the VCs or is it the holders?
mm. I remember we talked about this even last year, and it's continuing to be those open-ended questions. As a net result, I would still say it's a positive. Like if I was a Pudgy holder, I would be happy to see this, mainly because again, when you're talking about the risk of these NFT collections falling into the wayside and just being forgotten about, I'm at least confident that, hey, they've got the capital, they've got the runway to last, until hopefully the next bull run, which again, like really bolsters their chances of being relevant in the market. That's the way I would frame it, where that question wasn't even being asked by the likes of VFriends, Yuga Labs, Doodles, all of those were raising venture funding. But to your point, that question of that conflict between NFT holders who think they own some sort of pseudo equity, like wrongly, but they still do. That tension between their interests and venture sort of the investors' interests as well as the founders' interests, that conflict is still there nonetheless. But I think right now the main thing to focus on would be the positives of them just lasting, which is sounds pretty sad to say, but it's something that capital is so necessary when all these teams, as you said, writings on the wall for these lower tier collections that probably are getting very, very close to running out of capital.
Yeah, I agree. I think Luca will be able to handle the communications well, and I think
That's
half of the battle with these announcements and just managing your community is actually having a pulse on the community and knowing how to sort of talk to them. And I think Frank de Gods and Luca are somewhat of the gold standard at the moment. I've seen really the three sort of what we were calling blue chips up until 3-4 months ago in Moonbirds, Clonex, and Doodles have all been crushed, and there's a common theme there, right? And that's a lack of communication and poor communication to their holders, and probably many holders feeling, and I would say in most circumstances justifiably so, like there are competing interests, as in, are you actually going to look after holder value, or have you just used us for an easy capital raise and now you're going over here, and the community is somewhat of a burden to you now. And I got to say it does feel like that at times in some of these communities.
Yeah, for sure. Just closing on that, I think a nice little thing they did to sort of bridge that sort of tension or to ease the tension was they copied Yuga Labs' textbook example, where I remember when they announced that raise, they uploaded an image to accompany their sort of tweet, and it was a grid of all the investors, and each of them was represented by a Bored Ape, like even Adidas and all that. Like, if you want in on this round, you need to own a Bored Ape. And similarly, I noticed Pudgy did that this week. It's very small, but again, it goes back to your like Luca Nets being aware of this tension and just different, like small, subtle ways to, represent, whether it's just a token thing or not, whether these investors, hey, they own Pudgies, they're a part of it, we're all on the same train, going in the same direction. Small things like that, but I think they do really, really help.
Bored Ape, we have tested this week. Almost, I'm just going through some past sales, Matt, but I think we've had a little bit of bump in the last 24 hours. But we were testing 40 ETH. I don't think there was any sales under 40. I can see a 40.610 from a day ago. Oh, actually, I do see a 39.46 WETH sale. Crazy to see. When we think about Bored Apes, it's obviously still a lot of money, but I hope that the apes, when they've had moments like this before, they've tested over the last 12 months sort of that 50 range. But I was a little bit worried yesterday that we might have been seeing, mid 30s, maybe even going down to 30. It's shown a little bit of strength. And not only that, as we've gone to air, Matt, we have actually had a sale for 200 ETH for Bored Ape 6805, which is a blue grill and a laser eye Bored Ape with a flannel shirt and an earring. It's a pretty cool ape, but a 200 ETH sale. So I will be getting on the Bored Ape sales bot on Twitter after this, Matt, and doing what I used to do a few years ago and having some fun by writing free in the comments when that sale has happened. So shout out to the seller and the buyer there. But I just wanted to make mention that, obviously we talk about some of these other collections that are getting hammered, but even Bored Apes are not immune to this. And same as CryptoPunks, but generally, if the apes are doing bad, that's going to make the general NFT market even worse. So I want to see some more strength in the apes. Let's go, Bored Apes.
Definitely, yeah. We were just gonna say that. Same thing with Bitcoin and the altcoins. Like altcoins can't really do that well unless Bitcoin's doing well. Same thing with crypto pumps and Bored Apes. So yeah, hopefully that 40 ETH floor holds.
Absolutely. And DGod's joined Blur Blend. What was your take on the announcement from Blur last week, Matt, where you could essentially do the buy now, pay later type of arrangement and the whole financialization of sort of NFTs?
Yeah, it's very like afterpay sort of afterpay-esque sort of activity going on. I think the timing was a bit strange. Like I think this sort of product will do make sense in like a bull run in terms of for speculators who would really just have an inkling that a project is about to go on a solid run. In that case, this sort of project or product blend makes sense. But otherwise, like yeah, I have heard the interest rates or the rates that you do pay if you do borrow an NFT and you do hold it for several weeks or even going out to months, like gets pretty exorbitant. But again, it's backed by Paradigm, who are really deep in sort of pushing the limits of DeFi and financialization of NFTs. Like I guess it was always not always going to come, but it's always been this thing going on in the background, and they've probably had a really big part in sort of putting it to the forefront with Blur. So we'll see how that adoption goes. I did notice, Milady's, who we'll probably talk about soon, but they were one of the three projects that were in that launch announcement. And, I have a pretty good understanding of why that's the case. It's because I've researched the likes of NFTX and I think Floor DAO, which is part of NFTX. And their Milady's have always been like very big users because again, a lot of their holders come from that DeFi sort of background. So look, it's a really exotic sort of product again in this market. I'm not super interested in using it, but we'll see how the growth of it goes through using analytics sites like Dune. We'll see what the traction is and the adoption.
Yeah, I think exotic product is a great way to put it. Said on the show last week that I haven't used it personally. It's not to say that I won't use it, but it just feels a lot to get your head around, right? Like I'm sure if you're a former, trader or something like that, it will come from TradFi or have been in crypto for a while. Maybe the sort of maybe the ducks line up for you and this is something that you want to jump into, but it just feels like a fast way to get wrecked when you don't really know all the implications. And particularly in this market too, right, where it's hard enough to sort of keep your head above water without sort of getting a little bit too complex. So shout out to anyone that's loving the product, but I agree. I think exotic is a great way to frame it. Let's quickly talk about the Diamond Exhibition Shuffle. I think I said on last week's show that I didn't want to talk about Moonbirds or Proof because I've been talking about them too much in the last few months, just given that it's been a very big fall from grace for both of those projects. But we have seen Moonbirds try to right the wrong of the stuff up that happened a couple of weeks ago with the Diamond Nest rewards for the art. Matt, you were a day one Diamond Nester. I was a day one Diamond Nester. I got two mint passes. I got two Summer Wagners, so I was one of the Diamond Nesters that were affected, where I got double the same artwork. You threw yours back into the pile. I threw one of mine back into the pile. I am keeping one of the Summer Wagner's Jawbone collections. I quite liked it, which is good. I think it was my fifth choice. What did you get the second time around overnight, Matt?
Yeah, I got memory loss the first time, which I think was maybe my fifth sort of preference. So look, yeah, I was relatively happy with it, but just just that temptation to put it back in was too much for me. I wanted to see what else I would get, and especially with those other sort of incentives that they're bringing in for the raffle. I think tomorrow or whatever was enough for me to put it back in, see what happens. I think I actually got my fourth preference, which was which turned out to be Deja Vu by Melissa. I'm not even going to attempt the last name, but yeah, really nice generative piece. And yeah, a pretty well known. Just going off the Twitter follow account, which is a very basic way, but a decently well known generative artist or established generative artist, I should say. And yeah, I was happy. I was happy with the piece. Just got it this morning. I haven't looked at it for too long, been getting on with some work. But what about yourself, Greg? Were you happy
Yeah,
with your
no,
decision to go back in? Oh,
no. Look, I knew rolling the dice. I probably had there's probably bigger downside, but as we said before, Matt, with degens, right, we have a free roll. So I ended up getting, look, a piece that I'm not aesthetically I'm quite happy with, but I've got to admit I don't know a lot about IP Sketch. I think Secure D, who we've had on the pod the last couple of weeks, is a fan of IP Sketch. So I need to dig a little bit more into he or she. I'm not sure. The piece is called Impossible Distance. It's a generative piece. It looks good, but ultimately, from a floor price perspective, and would I have kept the second Summer Wagner and just sold that? Yes. But Matt, we still have a little bit of upside with our decision because this was not communicated all that clearly. Because I think when they were re-raffling, it sounded like they were going to throw a bunch of new NFTs into the pile, along with some of the other NFTs left in the Diamond exhibition. It's actually two new re-rolls now. So one is the re-roll of the initial art, and now there's this quote unquote like extra bonus. So some of the things in the raffle, I mean, it's very, very confusing. You and I are both in this project, and it almost takes you a couple hours a week to try to keep your head around all the complexity around projects, particularly Moonbirds. What's in the raffle? 20 Diamond exhibition pieces, including a Beeple every day. I read that as just one. They're just doing one Beeple every day. I'm going to call that out and say that that's poor. I'm sort of bashing on Moonbirds here a little bit, but I think they deserve some of it. So they said, Kevin was on a town hall shortly after this and said, we're going to get a bunch of Beeples. The terminology
Yes,
was,
I
we're
do
going to get
remember
a
that.
bunch of Beeple every
It was one of
days.
the reasons why I did put it back.
Now, I'm reading this as it says, including the at Beeple every day. So, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they've bought up multiples, but I read that most likely as only one. So we will find out most likely tomorrow, and I won't use the terminology most likely again because I think I've just said it 10 times in a row. But we've also had five Moonbirds, five.
It's two a bunch, Greg. Even if it is two, still not a bunch. But
five Moonbirds, five oddities, five mythic eggs, four pieces from Grail's artists,
I do like
including
this
a Squiggle, a Tyler Hobbs, the Wall, a Gremplin, Cryptoad. So let's cross our fingers, Matt, that you and I secure maybe the Squiggle and the Tyler Hobbs Wall. That'd be nice. I think if that happens, you'll have to come back on the show next week and we'll just have a 30-minute show of you and I celebrating that win.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. Hopefully,
All
fingers
right.
crossed. We'll see this weekend.
Moving on, wanted to talk just quickly about the Nouns ecosystem. So there's a video by Nounish, which is one of the many subsidiaries of Nouns, that sort of spin-offs, etc. And I thought this video was amazing. I mean, full disclosure, there was a little bit of an NFT fest shout out in there, which sort of caught my attention. But I feel like, Matt, Nouns is almost this like project that is doing exceptionally well. It's this fully decentralized project. It's got amazing holders and creativity, but it very, very rarely gets talked about, right? In sort of outside of, like, we're always talking about Bored Apes and Pudgys and Squiggles and all that kind of stuff. Like, my question to you is, are Nouns underrated?
I think, if they're not underrated, they're definitely under. Yeah, they deserve more discussion or just attention, really. So I guess in that aspect, yeah, they're underrated because not many people even know what they're up to. And I would actually put a very similar example you reminded me of as you said that is Forgotten Runes Wizards cult, where no one really ever talks about it, but they're a fanatic sort of community and they're building all this lore and like these animations they released recently, which were like really nice production quality. And yeah, Nouns is another one where it's a great example of, community grassroots, organization between different, as you said, all these sub sort of DAOs in a way, all these sub communities. And yeah, they have sort of, pierced the veil in a sense of getting to some mainstream. We saw that one with what's the skateboard noun in
Gami
Australia? Gami. How they had that
and
Brazilian
Nas DAO. Yeah.
statue. Yeah, Nas DAO, the statue of that Nas Nasdaq sort of PFP in Brazil at a skate park, like that sort of stuff. Very, very cool. And I wish we did talk about it a lot more, but yeah, unfortunately, that speculative nature of it, I suppose, with that higher floor price, really, brings it out of the everyday sort of discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think that was one of the prohibitive sort of things that nouns have been essentially trying to demystify. Is obviously if you do hold one of the full nouns, and I think the floor's maybe around 30 ETH for a full noun at the moment. I mean, back in the bull run, it was almost like 90, 100 ETH, and that was when
Yeah.
ETH was at pretty staggering prices. But they did introduce little nouns quite some time ago. You can pick those up for about 0.15. I'm not sure sort of the sway in terms of what type of treasury, etc. I mean, that the TLDR on nouns are that every sale of a new noun, there's one a day that goes to the treasury. And last time I looked, I think there was something like 30,000 ETH or something like that
Mm.
they'd accumulated, and they essentially, as a nouns holder, you can vote on new projects that try to bring new awareness and sort of essentially pump up the brand of nouns. And they just have this organic feel about them with all these builders. And I've got to be on, like, we've seen other DAOs, Matt, and we've seen Moonbirds try to get their Lunar Society off the ground, but it's too manufactured, in my opinion. Like, that's not to say that I think it
Mm.
won't work completely. And I must admit, like, again, you only have so many hours in the day, so I haven't gone too deep into like what's involved with the Lunar Society or how the early projects that have been funded are going. But the difference with nouns is, like, you don't have a founding team with a big treasury that's sort of carving out a little bit of money to throw to it, and sort of like, here, go over the side community and go knock yourselves out with this little bit of treasury. You've actually got a project that was founded and grounded in sort of doing this, with their treasury and giving out money on a consistent basis and letting the community really vote on like what is going to be the best for the nouns brand. And it just really feels like this groundswell of just people scattered all around the world that are helping to build towards nouns. And then you've got all these spin-offs like you were talking about, with NARS, and there's also the Bonies, which is another project that I learned about, through my affiliation with the Nouns project at NFT Fest. And I just think it's such a fascinating and interesting project. The iconic glasses, it's to me, it's such an underrated project. And I think it just goes along and does its own business on almost on the side of the overarching NFT discussion. It gets left out so much. So yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's another one. I think when you talk about that eyes wide open on OpenSea and Blur, I think that would be one that would fall into that other one, having your peripheral vision that could just keep with that large treasury of, yeah, I just looked it up, nearly 30,000. Yeah, they'll be around for a long time, and one that could be sort of underrated. And well, yeah, as you said, Greg, I do agree that it is underrated ultimately.
I think we might have to get Gami or some people from the
Mm,
Nouns ecosystem onto a future show. It'll be an interesting discussion.
yeah.
Okay, as we wrap things up, Matt, did want to give a couple of little shout outs, and then we're going to finish with a question. I'm going to give you that question now so you can get your thinking boots on. Your favorite NFT under 1 ETH right now. So I'm going to circle back on that in a second, but I did want to make a mention to John Carlo's Mint or Skip upcoming drop. So we've said this on this show a couple of times. There's a pretty good newsletter from John Carlo, who I think is one of the better voices in the NFT space. I've followed him for quite some time. He's always pretty objective. Been in his Discord at Midnight Labs. They have an upcoming mint, which I think I've got allow list for, but it's 0.088 ETH. And that is going to be almost like a curated membership to seeing what NFT drops are upcoming, how to get on to allow lists, etc. And I think it's pretty reasonably priced. So if you go to John Carlo's Twitter, I'm sure you can find information on that. Matt, do you know if you have allow lists on that yourself?
And I haven't got around to it just yet, so yeah, I'll have to get that teed up because again, long term bullish on betting. It's almost a bet on wanting to be aligned with the founder, which yeah, he's very impressive and sure to be around for many more years.
Absolutely. The last thing I wanted to mention, Matt, and just wanted to get your take, is the challenge that, we've talked about a lot of challenges for the NFT market in general, but I was having a discussion with someone at the MetaKeys celebration a few weeks ago at Oshi Gallery, and it's this interesting sort of scenario for NFT projects that are trying to promote long-term holders. In the Moonbirds ecosystem, you and I are day one nesters, as we said before. Yet the people that have won out are the traders, the people with the traders mindsets. And so you've got projects and project founders that are trying to reward loyalty and trying to build community through loyalty. But ultimately, the most loyal supporters of pretty much nearly every project have been the ones that have got hurt the most in terms of financial upside. It's been actually the traders and the ones that have had a flip mentality that are actually been the winners. And then how do you build a brand when you've got so many holders left with a bad taste in their mouth, knowing that they were promoted to sort of consider loyalty of the project, and they've acted on a lot of information. And to your point earlier, Matt, a lot of promises that haven't been delivered. And then you're left with holders, with bag holders that are your most loyal sort of supporters, but are down bad financially versus their friends that got out of the project and made bank on it. Like, how do you think projects negate this? Like, is it just a matter of like, when a project like Doodles or Moonbirds has such a high floor during a bull market and then makes some errors and then, the air comes out of the balloon? Is it just, it is what it is? But I mean, like, I'm trying to reconcile like how NFT projects, I mean, Bored Apes are an exception, and maybe
Yeah.
Azuki, because Bored Apes were able to make their original
Mm.
holders essentially quite well off, right? So there
Yeah.
was a strong affinity to the brand, even when the floor would temporarily dip, or even as it is now, going down to that sort of 40 range. I think for a lot of other projects that are trying to promote loyalty, but the reality is, like, if I was saying to someone to get into NFTs now, I would be saying something much different than what I said a year or two ago, where I'm like, oh, you should hold on, and like, because there can be like bonuses and airdrops at the end, and like they'll reward their holders. And we've seen like a lot of projects essentially somewhat, do some shady stuff where it's almost been interpreted by the NFT market as they're turning their back on their loyal holders. But their loyal holders are also the bag holders, right? Like the traders have been the ones that have actually made money.
Yeah, I think my mind goes to, in all of this, probably the discussion we had earlier in terms of just like the one market cycle. Like, I suppose like that's all the data we've got. So it's like, yes, the traders have won. The way I would try to position it, or at least look at it, as being like, well, the traders have won so far. But again, that sort of doesn't really, that doesn't really get to the point of what you were saying, where, really for the loyal early stage holders, at least from a financial aspect, which is like the one aspect that we're looking at it from in this instance. At those sort of pico tops or cycle highs where the momentum's obvious, it still doesn't get over the fact that maybe it just is what it is, where, if it is from financial, the thing I was wondering, as you said, that was to do with, early holders, really at least having other benefits that are non-financial, such as, making contacts, whether it's professionally or whether it's, making friends or whatnot, that you meet up IRL, but again, like, when all is said and done and everyone's down bad, how valuable is that? So for
Yeah.
these project founders and these teams that are trying to encourage loyalty, I think communication has a big part of it as well. And ways forward, it would just be things that maybe aren't financial, but ways that just acknowledge those early holders in different ways, which again comes a lot down to communication, and even, the strategy of how you release certain things, or the way you go about announcing certain products and whatnot. That's all I've got. But again, like, we are still early, as we always say, and there just isn't much data to go off. But it is a great point. Yeah, how to reconcile that.
Yeah, it's something I don't want to harp on it for too long.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
probably
yeah.
should have brought it up earlier in the show as we close. But I've spoke to a number of people that have been involved with projects, either as founders or have been, project leads or marketing leads,
Yeah,
or
sure.
in the discords on the sort of coal face. And I think they often forget to put themselves in the shoes of the collector, and it's sort of like, well, we've got these people that these 3 people or 5 people that are obnoxious, and they're saying this and they're saying that, and screw them, and we're going to kick them out and all that kind of stuff. And I know that you get your bad apples, but this whole thing of like, you want to say like, we're community and this and that, and the fact is like, your most loyal supporters have been the ones that have been hurt the most. And I think that you have to take that in consideration. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I just think that it's something I haven't been able to reconcile. Like, for my own sort of sanity, I've just, thought about like, well, what would have my own NFT wallets and portfolio looked like if I had sold much earlier on, and then in this blood right now that we're seeing in the NFT market, just come back in and swoop everything up again for 70%, 80%, 90% discounted. And that's the real hard part, I think, of trying. Like, I think in art it's different. Like, if you buy a chromie squiggle for 16 ETH and then it retraces to 8 or 9, it's like, well, like you're not sort of tweeting Snowfro like, pump the floor, man, pump the floor. Like, it's like, so I think art sort of is somewhat immune. Like, I know artists do get they do get that type of feedback on Twitter and sometimes Discords, etc. But I think with the sort of quote unquote brand building and community building with the sort of the PFP projects of the world, like that's a tough one. But anyway, let's leave that and maybe pick that up at another time, Matt. Let's close on your favorite NFT buy right now under 1 ETH. Is there anything? I mean, there's a lot in the market under 1 ETH right now, but we've mentioned a couple already in this show. But anything come to mind?
Thousands of them. There's thousands of collections under 1 ETH, tens of thousands probably. But the one that did come to mind for me that is full disclosure, I do hold I think 2 or 3, but the Rug Radio Genesis NFT is currently 0.128. I'm still in the habit of going to OpenSea traditional, but call it 0.12, probably something like that. And I like this for like, yes, there's 20,000 of them. But what I did go in Austin, I was over at Consensus, and they did have a Rug Radio sort of evening, which was for the holders of the PFP or the Genesis NFT or even the Member Pass, and that was a great evening. But I think the reason why I still have pretty high conviction that this entity or this Rug Radio community and DAO will last this brutal bear market and come through to achieve higher things is just because it is one of probably the most like well structured or well thought out DAOs that I've seen so far. We probably don't have time to get into it at the end of this, but I think they are only like a year and a half old, and they've already got partnerships with Uniswap, like Uniswap Labs, partnerships with Nike. Again, just like a studio within Nike. And other sort of high profile ones, they get a lot of revenue, which is unheard of in NFT space. They get a lot of revenue from people promoting on their Twitter spaces. So Rug Radio has a bunch of different podcasts, which all have advertising. And the important thing, the only thing that I would like to highlight here is that at least for their main, like, I guess, product or podcast, which is the GM NFTs with Farouk and OSF and Mando, they actually use like the majority of that revenue they use to sweep the floor of Genesis NFTs. So going back to what we talked about at the start of the show in terms of where is that demand coming from, it's very hard to explain where that would be coming from in this era. They're one that just continue to even now just continue to buy any dip into the floor. So so it's one that I struggled to find one in this sort of deep bear market. As you said, looks like everything at this stage is going to keep going down, but really excited for what the future holds for Rug Radio. It's one that's a lot different to all the PFP collections. So yeah, that's one I thought I'd mention.
Amazing shout out to Rug Radio and Farouk there. And let's give a shout out to Mel, who's Aussie. Mel actually did the tokenomics for Rug Radio.
She's so smart. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So her handle, for those that are unaware, is at Be Like Water. So if you want to check out Mel's Twitter account, at Be Like Water. And I'll give a shout out too to Rect Radio. You mentioned some of their sort of media products, Matt, but I've actually been listening this week. I've got about 30 minutes left. It's a fantastic episode. Rect Radio episode 21 with Elliot Rose. So that one is actually with OSF and Mando, but also keyboard, what's his name?
Mm.
KBM, keyboard
Yeah.
warrior,
Keyboard
monkey
monkey.
warrior. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Keyboard monkey. Yeah.
he's a good trader. Like, as in, like, I like his tweets, and I often pay attention. So Elliot Rose, a bit of a sort of mental performance coach, and it's been a really fascinating discussion. So if you want to check that out, it's
Cool.
part of the Rug Radio ecosystem. For me, under 1 ETH, I'm actually going to be greedy. I'm going to give 3. Now, I don't necessarily know like how the floors are going to perform short term, long term. Nothing is financial advice and never is here. But I've got to say, I can't not give cyber brokers a shout out. They're sitting at around 0.4 at the moment. I just think the level of detail, the team, Josie's background, like, she's not going anywhere. She said that to me in an interview, a couple of weeks ago when I'm doing the Cointelegraph feature. You want to talk about a project that's just going to, like, is so crypto native and cyber brokers. And I think they've got enough whale support if a bull comes back where, you're going to have the Pranksies of the world and the Jimmy.eth, et cetera. They're probably going to start buying up big again, which they have in that project. So I think cyber brokers, for me, I do hold cyber brokers in full disclosure. One project that I've been stalking, and I'm talking about this on air the last few weeks, I don't hold any currently, is MFers. I just love MFers. Like the whole CC0 thing, a lot different how they went about it than Moonbirds. But ultimately, I just think that that's a project that's got meme value. I think, whether it ends up, at 0.1, 0.2 or 1 or 2 ETH, I got no idea, but I like MFers. It's almost dropped to around that sort of 0.5, 0.55 at the moment.
Okay.
But I'm just being very selective in which one I want, because I think I'm probably going to switch to an MFR PFP soon. I don't know when, but soon. And lastly, Xcopy, Max Payne and friends, Secure D and I spoke about this particular project a couple of weeks ago. That's at about 0.4 at the moment. I think that's probably a decent range to get some exposure to Xcopy's ecosystem, as I touched upon with my purchase with Giant Swan earlier today. So they're the 3 I like, but I really like Rug Radio, Matt. That's one that I hadn't thought about. I'm certainly aware of Rug Radio, and I think Farouk was actually on the Proof podcast with Sam, NFT Statistics, over the last couple of days.
I saw that pop up.
So I'm going to go and check that out. And Farouk was actually a virtual speaker at NFT Fest. So shout out to Farouk for supporting my event in November last year. Matt, that is all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this episode, and thank you for giving us your time. Love to get you back on the show in a future episode. I think Steve, my regular co-host, will be back soon. So love to bring you back into
the ape's back in.
The ape is back in. Love to bring you back into the fold though at some point. And tell everyone where they can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, it's just my name. So Matt_Willemsen on Twitter. So Greg might just drop that below, because I have, since I was born, having to explain how to spell my last name. But that's the main place. And Moonbird PFP for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. Well, nothing, as I've said before, is financial advice here on this show. This is for educational and informational purposes only. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on episode 36. We will be back next week for another episode of the Ape and Bird Show, and we'll see you then.